You'll never be as good as your brother. Those words didn't just land like an insult. They cracked across the room like a whip, cutting through the air, leaving silence heavy in its wake. My mother's eyes were cold. Her lips curled in that satisfied way she always had when she believed she'd won. My father shifted in his chair, straightening his tie as if avoiding the ugliness of the moment would erase it. And my brother Michael? He leaned back with a smug little smirk as if this was the crown he had always been waiting for. I didn't flinch. My hands trembled beneath the table, yes, but my voice was steady. I looked directly at them and let the words spill out, calm and sharp like glass. Then ask him to pay. The room froze. My mother blinked once, twice, as if she hadn't expected me to dare. My father's jaw tensed, but he stayed silent, as always. And Michael? His grin faltered only slightly, but enough for me to notice. For one small moment, the golden boy's shine cracked. I remember that silence stretching long and unbearable, thick enough that I could hear my own pulse in my ears. But what they couldn't hear, what they would never understand, was that those words were not just defiance. They were a lifetime condensed into a single line, because this wasn't the first time I had been reminded of my place. No. This was only the sharpest cut in a lifetime of them. Growing up in our house meant existing in Michael's shadow. He was the firstborn, the golden child, the one whose every step was celebrated. I, on the other hand, was the afterthought, the spare. If Michael brought home a trophy, it went on the mantel for guests to admire. If I brought home straight A's, the response was a nod and a question. Why couldn't you get higher scores like your brother? Even birthdays told the story. Michael's were extravagant, balloons, parties, relatives gathering to admire him. Mine were quieter, forgotten more than once, with a cake purchased from the grocery store at the last minute. I learned early that in my family, worth wasn't measured in who you were, but how much you resembled him. And that night, at the table, all of that history burned in my chest. "Stop it," Michael muttered finally, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You're just being dramatic again." Dramatic. That was his word for me, for my pain, for my anger, for the years of being invisible while he basked in their light. Dramatic? I echoed, my tone colder than I'd ever heard it before. "No, Michael. Dramatic is pretending this family is whole while you let them carve me out of it," my mother hissed. "Enough!" As if my voice was the problem, not the poison they'd poured into me for years. My father just rubbed his temples, the universal signal that I was exhausting him again. And that was when I realized something. They weren't going to stop. This wasn't a single wound. It was who they were. And maybe it was who they had always been. So when I pushed back my chair and stood up, it wasn't just leaving the table. It was leaving the version of me they had forced me to be. "You want your perfect son to carry everything?" I said, steady, almost calm. "Fine. From now on, don't look at me to hold the weight." I walked out, the walls of our house closing in behind me. The night air hit my face, cold and sharp, but freeing. For the first time, I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging. I wasn't even breaking. I was waking up. And though I didn't know it then, that single moment, the insult, my reply, the silence after, was the spark. The match strike against the years of gasoline they had poured over me, everything that followed, every choice, every storm, every act of defiance, would come from that fire. That was the night I stopped being their shadow. That was the night I began to vanish. They say childhood shapes you. But in my case, childhood carved me into someone I barely recognized. From the very beginning, favoritism wasn't subtle in our house, it was a spotlight, always tilted toward Michael. He was the golden boy, the one with every achievement amplified, polished, and paraded. I was there, always present but blurred, as if my existence was nothing more than background noise. I still remember being 7 years old, clutching a drawing I'd spent hours on, colored pencils smudging my hands, excitement racing through me. I held it out to my mother. "Look, Mom, I made this for you." She barely glanced up from her magazine. "That's nice," she muttered, before turning her attention to Michael, who had just announced he'd scored 1 goal in soccer practice. Her face lit up like Christmas morning. "Michael, that's amazing. You're such a natural." I stood there, invisible, the paper slipping from my hands onto the floor. That's when I learned applause in our house was reserved for him. It only got worse as we grew. My father, stern and unyielding, carried a ledger in his mind of Michael's accomplishments. Captain of the debate team, future lawyer. Just like me, he'd brag to neighbors, clapping Michael on the back. When it came to me, his words were thinner, dismissive. Average, he once called me. He thought I didn't hear, but I did, and my mother, God. My mother, she was the perfectionist, the woman who ironed Michael's shirts until they gleamed but handed mine to me, wrinkled, as if even my clothes weren't worth her time. Stand up straight, she'd scold. Don't embarrass us. I wasn't being prepared for success. I was being trained to never be enough. The humiliation sank deeper with every comparison. Why can't you be more like your brother? Became the background music of my life. Report card days were the worst. I'd come home with straight A's, heart pounding with hope, only to hear my father say, Michael had those too, but he also won the science fair. You need to push harder, push harder. Against what? Against a wall that was never meant to move? The only thing that saved me was Daniel. Daniel wasn't family by blood, but he was more of a brother than Michael had ever been. We met in middle school, two awkward kids with oversized backpacks and too much silence at home. He had a crooked smile, a sharp wit, and a way of making me laugh when the weight of my family pressed too heavy. I'll never forget one afternoon after a particularly brutal dinner. My father had just finished reminding me that failure runs in excuses, while Michael smirked over dessert. I stormed out to the park, where Daniel found me sitting on the swings, fists clenched. They're never going to see you, he said softly, dropping onto the swing beside me. I glared at the ground. So what, I'm supposed to just accept it? He leaned back, smirking. No, you're supposed to build your own light so bright they can't ignore it. Make them choke on their own shadows. For a moment I laughed, actually laughed, but his words stayed. They planted themselves in me like seeds, waiting for the right storm to grow, because humiliation doesn't just destroy you. Sometimes it molds you. Sometimes it prepares you. And though I didn't realize it then, every moment of invisibility, every cutting remark, every time my parents praised Michael while dismissing me, it was all gathering. Like water behind a dam, waiting for the day it would finally break. The night they told me not to come to Michael's wedding wasn't an isolated cruelty. It was the climax of a lifetime of being erased. And as I sat with Daniel that evening, watching the streetlights flicker on, I felt something shift. Maybe I wasn't powerless after all. Maybe the story wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. You'll never be as good as your brother. That line became the anthem of my teenage years. A constant reminder that no matter how hard I worked, I was already a failure in their eyes. By then, Michael wasn't just the golden child. He was the family's trophy. Every medal, every certificate, every spotlight seemed to belong to him. And me? I was just the shadow standing behind his shine. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, nervously sliding my report card across to my father. Straight A's, perfect attendance, even a teacher's note praising my work ethic. His eyes barely flicked over the paper before he set it aside. Good, he said flatly, then glanced toward the living room where Michael's soccer trophies lined the shelves. But Michael just won regionals. That's real achievement. You should try for something people actually notice. The words landed like stones in my chest. I had worked until my fingers cramped, stayed up late studying under the dim light of my desk lamp, but all of it evaporated in the shadow of a soccer ball. My mother wasn't any better. At dinner, she would beam at Michael, recounting his victories like bedtime stories. Our star athlete, she'd gush. He has a future. Then she'd turn to me, her tone sharpening. And you, why don't you join a team? Sitting in books won't win you respect. Mom, I whispered once, stung by her dismissive tone. I'm doing well in school. She sighed, setting down her fork. Yes, but academics don't make memories. Look at Michael, he makes us proud. That was the script of my life. His accomplishments were pride, mine were placeholders. And then there was Aunt Margaret. If my parents' favoritism was a knife, Aunt Margaret's words were salt on the wound. She was my mother's sister, sharp-tongued and unyielding, the kind of woman who treated family gatherings like courts where she was the judge. The first time she truly cut me was at a Thanksgiving dinner. Michael had just returned from another tournament with a gleaming medal. The whole table erupted in applause. I smiled weakly, clutching the pie I had baked myself. Before I could even offer a slice, Aunt Margaret leaned across the table, her eyes narrowing at me. "Still no medals? No ribbons? Not even a club you belong to?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "Honestly, dear, you'll end up a nobody if you keep living in books." The laughter around the table wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was the laughter of people too polite to disagree, too blind to see me shrinking in my chair. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "I like studying. I want to go to college," Aunt Margaret smirked. "College is fine, but charm wins hearts, not grades." "You should learn that from Michael," Michael chuckled, basking in the attention, while my parents nodded along as if her words were gospel. That night, alone in my room, I stared at my stack of certificates and essays pinned neatly to the wall. Achievements no one clapped for, successes no one remembered. I pressed my forehead to the glass of the window, wishing the stars could see me because my family never did. Humiliation doesn't just sting, it festers. It curls inside your chest until every laugh feels like mockery, every silence feels like agreement. And with Aunt Margaret's arrival, it became clear I wasn't just overlooked. I was unwanted. Looking back, those years weren't just about being invisible. They were about being erased piece by piece, until I almost believed them. Almost. Because deep inside, a quiet voice still whispered that one day, their comparisons would collapse under the weight of my truth. "You should be grateful we even let you stay." Those words didn't just sting, they detonated. My mother's voice was sharp, polished like glass, and it sliced through me as if I was an intruder in my own home. Gratitude, as if my existence was a favor granted, not a birthright. It began at the dining table, the same place where Michael's victories were paraded and my efforts dismissed. My father cleared his throat, adjusting his tie like he always did before saying something unpleasant. "There are expenses," he muttered. "The wedding, the house repairs. We thought you could contribute." I looked up, startled. "Me? You know I'm still trying to get my career started. I barely have enough for my mother cut me off." Michael has been covering so much already. "He's successful, dependable. We can always rely on him." She turned her eyes on me, cold and unwavering. "And you should consider it an honor to finally do something useful. An honor. Useful." The words rang in my ears like a cruel chorus. I clenched my fork, my knuckles whitening. "So when Michael helps, it's pride. When I help, it's survival? Is that how it works?" Michael leaned back in his chair, arms folded, lips curling into that infuriating smirk. "Come on, don't make this dramatic. It's just money. If you can't manage, maybe you should admit you're not cut out for responsibility." His tone was casual, but it carried the weight of every comparison, every humiliation. I turned to my father, desperate for some sign of support. His silence was worse than words. He simply adjusted his glasses, eyes dropping back to his plate, as if the conversation was an inconvenience he wished would end. "Dad?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Do you really think I'm less than him? Less than Michael?" The silence was his answer. My chest tightened, rage and grief colliding inside me. Years of being invisible, years of hearing, "Why can't you be more like Michael?" All of it boiled into one moment, one decision. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. The sound startled even Michael, though his smirk never disappeared. "I don't owe you anything," I said, my voice low but shaking with fury. "Not gratitude, not money, not my silence." My mother's face hardened, lips pursed in disapproval. "Don't be foolish. This family has given you everything." "Everything?" I laughed bitterly. "You've given me nothing but reminders that I'll never be enough. And you're right. I won't be like Michael. I'll be me. And that's something none of you will ever understand." For the first time, the table fell completely silent. Even Aunt Margaret, who was sipping her wine in judgment, set down her glass. Michael shifted uncomfortably, the smirk flickering. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I headed for the door. "Where are you going?" my mother snapped. "Out," I said without looking back. "And when I leave this time, I'm not coming back." The door slammed behind me, the sound echoing through the hallway like a gavel striking judgment. The night air was cold, sharp against my skin, but it felt cleaner than the suffocating air inside that house. That was the breaking point. The night I stopped being their burden and started being my own person. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what waited for me outside. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever future I built, it would be mine, untouched by their contempt. And with every step away from that house, I swore I would never return. The day I walked out of my parents' house, I disappeared. Not just from their dinner table, but from their lives completely. No calls, no updates, no letters. If they wanted me gone, I would grant them silence sharper than any words I could ever say. The first weeks were brutal. Loneliness crept in like an unwanted tenant, filling every corner of my new reality. I rented a tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet that dripped like a clock ticking away my failures. At night, the silence felt heavier than the furniture. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made a mistake, if cutting them off meant cutting myself adrift forever. Daniel refused to let me sink. He was the one anchor in my storm. "You're stronger than you think," he told me one evening as we sat on milk crates doubling as kitchen chairs. He raised his plastic cup of instant coffee like it was champagne. "This place may be small, but it's yours." "That's freedom, my friend," I smiled faintly, though doubt gnawed at me. "Freedom doesn't feel this empty." "Of course it doesn't," Daniel said, leaning back with his usual grin. "It feels terrifying at first, like jumping off a cliff. But eventually you realize you can fly." His confidence in me was unshakable even when mine crumbled. By day, I worked a low-paying job at a bookstore. Stacking shelves, ringing up customers, cleaning up after closing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I earned every dollar without depending on anyone's approval. Still, humiliation lingered. Each paycheck felt like a reminder of how little I had compared to Michael's trophies and my parents' proud speeches. Sometimes, in the quiet of the stockroom, I'd hear their voices echoing, "Why can't you be more like him?" My chest would tighten, the shame curling like smoke around my ribs. One night, overwhelmed, I dropped into the creaky chair at my desk and confessed it out loud. "Maybe they're right, Daniel. Maybe I'll never be enough." He looked at me steadily, his expression rare in its seriousness. "No, they're wrong. They built their pride on Michael because it was easy. But you," he pointed a finger at me, "you're building something from nothing. That takes more strength than they'll ever understand." His words lit a small spark in the darkness. I started noticing it in the smallest of moments. Carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs without asking for help. Fixing the faucet myself with nothing but a YouTube video and determination. Watching the city lights flicker outside my window and realizing I wasn't trapped in their shadow anymore. I was carving my own. Independence didn't roar into my life. It whispered, one step at a time, until the whispers grew louder than the doubts. Of course, the loneliness never disappeared completely. Holidays were the hardest. While others gathered around decorated tables, my dinners were microwave meals eaten alone. But even then, Daniel would show up with takeout, plopping it down on the counter like it was a feast. "Merry Christmas," he'd grin, handing me greasy bags. Nothing says holiday spirit like cold fries and soda, and for the first time in years, I'd laugh. Not the bitter laugh of rejection, but something real, something alive. That was when I realized, maybe my family had erased me, but they hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, breathing, fighting, living. And in that small, battered apartment, I began to understand that disappearing from their world wasn't the end. It was the beginning of mine. Resilience isn't something you're born with. It's forged. Mine was hammered into shape through years of struggle, each setback pounding me harder, each survival sharpening my edges. The bookstore job turned into shifts at a cafe, then into clerical work at a small office. Nothing glamorous, nothing worth bragging about at holiday dinners I no longer attended, but each paycheck mattered. Each bill I paid with my own money felt like a brick laid in the foundation of my independence. I remember staring at my reflection in the mirror of that tiny bathroom, fluorescent light buzzing above me. My clothes were cheap, my face tired, but my eyes, they looked different, stronger. Daniel noticed it too. One evening, as we walked home from work, he nudged my shoulder. "You don't flinch when you talk about them anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. He smiled. "Before, every mention of your family made you crumble inside. Now you just shrug. That's strength. You don't need them to survive." His words echoed in me like an anthem. I didn't need them. I poured myself into work, taking every opportunity, every side hustle. Nights spent sorting files, mornings rushing to beat the bus. I learned how to stretch $1, how to smile at rude customers, how to swallow pride and keep moving. Slowly, painfully, I climbed. And with every step, something inside me hardened, not into bitterness, but into determination. I wasn't just the forgotten child anymore. I was becoming someone else. Someone who didn't need approval, didn't crave applause. One night, sitting in my apartment surrounded by the faint hum of city traffic, I whispered it aloud. I don't need them to survive. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was powerful. That was the first sign of empowerment, the first flicker of the fire that one day would blaze into something much bigger. I didn't know it then, but this strength I was building wasn't just for survival. It was the seed of something else, something that looked a lot like revenge. Distance doesn't kill gossip, it sharpens it. Even after years apart, whispers of my family's perfect life drifted toward me like smoke, carrying the bitter scent of hypocrisy. It started at the office, where a coworker casually mentioned she knew my parents from social circles. "Your brother Michael, right? I heard his promotion didn't last long." She shrugged, eyes gleaming with the thrill of scandal. Something about missed deadlines, maybe worse. I froze, coffee cup halfway to my lips. "Michael, the flawless golden child, stumbling?" Later that week, Daniel brought home another story, his tone both cautious and amused. "Your dad, apparently he's drowning in debt. Word is he's been juggling loans just to keep up appearances." I tried to laugh, but the sound came out hollow. My father, who once told me I was a financial burden, now sinking under the weight of his own lies. And then came the whisper about my mother. At a dinner party, she'd been humiliated when one of her charity projects turned out to be a cover for poor bookkeeping. The social circles she worshipped were turning on her, their polite smiles curdling into gossip behind her back. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt vindication. For years, they had painted me as the failure, the invisible child, the weak link. And now their empire of perfection was cracking, one fracture at a time. Still, I said nothing. I kept my distance. But inside, a new instinct awakened. I began keeping records. Every rumor, every detail, every whispered story, I wrote them down. At first, it was just a habit, a strange comfort to see their flaws in black and white. But with each entry, the pages grew heavier, like ammunition waiting for the right moment. Daniel noticed the shift. "Why are you saving all this?" he asked one evening, watching me jot down notes. I looked at him, my voice calm, almost chilling. "Because one day, they'll matter. One day, these cracks will become their downfall, and I'll be ready." Daniel studied me, searching my face. "This isn't about survival anymore, is it?" "No," I whispered. "It's about justice." The word tasted dangerous and liberating all at once. So I kept my silence, outwardly detached, while secretly gathering the threads of their unraveling. They had erased me once, but now I was the one holding the pen. And though they didn't know it, the story of their downfall had already begun. The call came on a Tuesday evening, years after the night I vanished. My phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in so long it felt like a ghost had dialed it. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But curiosity won. "Hello?" My mother's voice, syrupy and artificial, spilled through the line. "It's been too long. We've missed you." I nearly laughed. "Missed me?" The same woman who told me I should be grateful to even stay under her roof. The silence I left behind must have grown unbearable, because here she was, pretending forgiveness was a gift she'd finally decided to bestow. "I didn't realize you still had my number," I said coolly. We've been thinking, she continued, carefully measured. Family should forgive. Michael agrees. Isn't that right, Michael? A muffled voice in the background chimed in. Yeah, it's time we let the past go. Let go, I thought bitterly. They hadn't let it go. They had buried me alive and now came knocking, not with love, but with need. Finally, my father's gruff tone broke through. There are difficulties. Your mother and I thought maybe with your stability now you could help. And there it was, the truth, naked and clumsy. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about money. I bit back a laugh. If only they knew. The child they dismissed, the one they branded useless, had built a life they couldn't even imagine. Years of grinding work had paid off. I wasn't scraping by anymore. I was thriving. My name carried weight in circles they'd never be invited to. Still, I kept my voice flat. Interesting. You want help from me, the disappointment? Don't say that, my mother snapped quickly. We never called you that. I smiled to myself, the sarcasm biting even if I didn't say it aloud. Of course you didn't call me that. You implied it daily like oxygen in the air we breathed. I'll think about it, I said finally. Good, my father replied with visible relief. We knew you'd come around. Family is family after all. Family. That word again, rolled out like a red carpet only when it suited them. I ended the call, staring at the phone screen until it went black, my reflection staring back at me. For the first time, I didn't feel the sting of their rejection. I felt something else entirely. Power. Because the irony was delicious. They thought they were pulling me back into their game. But they didn't know I'd already rewritten the rules. It didn't take long to discover the cracks in Michael's perfect life. The whispers I'd heard were true. He wasn't a golden child anymore. He was a drowning man, pulling everyone else under with him. I learned the details slowly, almost accidentally. A former co-worker of his mentioned missed payments, unpaid loans. A friend of a friend let slip that Michael had been bailed out by my parents more times than anyone cared to count. And then came the cruelest irony of all. The same parents who once sneered, "You'll never be as good as your brother. Ask him to pay," now whispered into my phone, ashamed. Michael needs help. Could you... I nearly choked on the bitterness of it. The line they had carved into me for years was now their curse. Ask him to pay? He couldn't. He was broke, desperate, leaning on the very parents who had built him up as my superior. When my mother first hinted at it, her tone trembled. He's had a few financial setbacks. You know how the economy is? Financial setbacks? I repeated. Is that what you're calling it? My father sighed heavily. He just needs some time. Some support? He's still your brother. Support. The same word they had refused me. The same lifeline they had cut from my hands years ago. This time I didn't swallow my anger. Do you hear yourselves? You made him your pride, your proof of perfection. And now that the mask is slipping, you want me to clean up the mess? Silence. The kind of silence that carries shame, not power. Michael finally grabbed the phone. His voice was sharp, defensive. Don't act like you're better than me. You've never carried the pressure I have. You don't know what it's like to be the chosen one. I laughed, an honest, bitter laugh that startled even me. Chosen? Michael, you weren't chosen. You were protected, shielded from consequences. And now that the bill has come due, you can't even pay it. For the first time, he had no smug reply. That moment sharpened into clarity. The years of humiliation, of being told I wasn't enough, crystallized into one simple truth. I held the power now. They had gambled everything on their golden son, and he had collapsed under the weight of his own arrogance. The irony cut deeper than any insult they had ever thrown at me. And I knew then. It was time. Time to stop watching from the sidelines. Time to stop simply recording their failures. It was time to strike back. Weddings are supposed to be a celebration. Michael's was staged like a royal coronation. The hotel ballroom glittered with chandeliers, every table draped in white silk, every corner drowning in flowers. Guests buzzed with champagne laughter. To them, the Carters were still untouchable. Until I walked in. Gasps rippled through the room like dominoes. Heads turned. Forks clattered against plates. Whispers rose. Is that... I thought they weren't invited. After all these years? My mother's face drained of color, lips tightening as if she had bitten glass. My father adjusted his tie, his usual mask of control trembling at the edges. Michael froze at the altar, one hand clenching Emily's, the other curling into a fist. I walked slowly, deliberately, heels clicking against marble, each step a reminder. I wasn't erased. Surprise, I said softly, though the microphone system caught it, amplifying my voice across the room. Emily blinked, confused. Who is this? Michael forced a smile, brittle and desperate. No one, just someone who doesn't belong here. No one? My laugh rang sharp. Funny, Michael, because from where I'm standing, it looks like your no one is holding the truth your family has buried for years. I pulled a slim folder from my bag. The weight of it wasn't just paper. It was years of silence, debts, betrayal, all compressed into pages sharp enough to cut through their lies. The crowd leaned forward. Phones came up recording. The perfect Carter wedding was no longer a private fairy tale. It was about to become public history. I opened the folder. These are bank statements. Loans taken in my name. Debts shoved under the rug while you, Michael, were paraded as the golden child. And here, I held up another paper, my father's signature clear. Proof of defaulted accounts, the kind that don't disappear just because you smile at your neighbors. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Emily's face crumpled, horror dawning. Michael, is this true? He stammered, sweat beading at his temple. She's lying. She's always been jealous. Don't listen to her. Jealous? I cut him off. My voice rose, steady, commanding. Jealous of what? A crumbling empire? Parents who belittle their own child? A brother who drowns in debt while pretending to stand tall? If I'm jealous, it's only of how long you've managed to fool everyone here. Emily snatched the papers from my hand, scanning quickly, her bouquet trembling. She looked at Michael, eyes wide with betrayal. You said everything was fine. That your family was perfect, gasps echoed. Someone in the back whispered, This is insane! Others murmured agreement. My mother tried to recover, stepping forward, voice sharp. Enough, this is a wedding, not a courtroom. Put that away and leave. I turned to her, calm as ice. You told me once I'd never be as good as him. That I should be grateful just to exist in your shadow. Well, here's the truth, Mother, your shadow has collapsed. And I didn't need to lift a finger to make it happen. You did it yourselves, the ballroom erupted. Guests muttered. Cameras flashed, and Emily dropped Michael's hand, backing away as if he were a stranger. For the first time in years, I felt taller than the chandeliers above me. The Carter facade cracked, and there was no going back. Chaos doesn't creep. It explodes. The ballroom, once pristine, now buzzed with disorder. Guests rose from their seats, half curious, half disgusted. Some whispered behind napkins, others openly pointed. Emily's parents stormed toward her, pulling her away from Michael as if protecting her from contamination. And then, my mother snapped, You couldn't wait, could you? She hissed at my father, voice carrying across the microphone left on the podium. You and your endless schemes. You said no one would ever know. My father shot back, veins visible at his neck. And you insisted we keep covering for Michael. You thought appearances mattered more than the truth. The crowd gasped. Their perfect unity shattered in real time. Michael slammed a fist on the table. Stop it, both of you! She's making all of this worse. He pointed at me like I was the villain in his collapsing kingdom. You think you're clever? You think anyone cares what you dragged in here? Before I could reply, a new voice cut in. Actually, yes. We care. It was Lily, my cousin. She stepped out from the crowd, her sharp eyes cutting through the tension. For years, she had been the quiet observer at family events, too polite to intervene. But now her voice rang with conviction. Everything they ignored, everything they denied, I saw it. I heard the way they treated you. You don't deserve the blame, they do. The room fell into stunned silence. Guests shifted, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time, someone from inside the family had spoken the truth aloud. Michael's face twisted. Stay out of this, Lily. You don't know what you're talking about. But she didn't back down. No, Michael. I know exactly what I'm talking about. You lived off lies, off debts, off your parents' blind worship. And now you want to silence the only person brave enough to expose it? Not this time! Her defense landed like a hammer. Guests began standing, murmuring agreement. Some shook their heads, gathering their things to leave. Others took out their phones, recording every second. The Carter reputation, polished for decades, was collapsing in the span of minutes. My mother grabbed Michael's arm, desperate. "Say something! Fix this!" But he had nothing. His lips moved without sound, his eyes darting, searching for a way out. For me, the chaos wasn't noise, it was music. The symphony of truth finally breaking through years of silence, and in the center of it all, Lily stood tall, her voice echoing the words I had carried alone for years. The Golden family was no longer golden. It was rusted, broken, and falling apart before an audience too large to ever forget. Silence after chaos feels heavier than the noise itself. The ballroom stood frozen, fragments of my family's perfect image scattered across the marble floor. Michael ripped off his bow tie, fury twisting his face, and stormed out through the side doors. Guests parted like water, some whispering, others filming as his figure disappeared into the night. My parents didn't chase him. They couldn't. My father sank into a chair, his shoulders collapsing under a weight he could no longer hide. My mother's manicured hands shook as she tried to gather the papers Emily had dropped, but the pages slipped from her fingers, scattering like dead leaves. For years, I had begged them to see me. For years, their eyes looked right through me, as if I were transparent. Tonight, they looked at me. Not with pride, not with love, but with fear. And strangely, that was enough. I stood still in the storm I had unleashed, calm, steady. The same girl who once trembled in their shadows was gone. In her place stood a woman who had survived silence, rejection, and erasure, and turned it into power. One guest whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "They did this to themselves." Another murmured, "She's braver than all of them combined." Their words wrapped around me like a balm. For so long I had been invisible, erased. Tonight, I was undeniable. I glanced at Emily. She clutched her veil in trembling hands, her eyes darting between me and my parents. Betrayal had stained her wedding dress more than any spilled wine could. "Michael lied to me," she whispered, voice breaking. I didn't answer. Some truths didn't need my confirmation. Instead, I turned back to my parents. My mother finally lifted her chin, but her voice was brittle. "Are you happy now? You've destroyed us." I held her gaze. "No, Mother. You destroyed yourselves. I just stopped carrying the weight of your lies." Her lips quivered, and for once, she had no reply. As I looked around the ruined hall, the scattered flowers, the abandoned glasses, the guests leaving in clusters, I felt no guilt, no sorrow. Just the strange peace of justice finally catching up. Years of invisibility had led to this. Years of humiliation had carved me into steel. And tonight I was sharper than any of them could bear. I didn't stay until the last guest left. I didn't need to. The wreckage was complete. My family's empire of appearances had collapsed, and nothing I added could make the ruins clearer. So, I walked toward the exit, head high, heels clicking in rhythm with the beat of freedom pounding in my chest. As I reached the doors, Daniel stepped forward from the shadows of the crowd. He hadn't said a word through the chaos, but his steady presence had been my anchor. "You ready?" he asked softly. I nodded. For the first time, I truly was. We stepped into the cool night air together. Behind us, voices rose in frantic chaos. Parents arguing, guests muttering, staff trying to restore order, but it no longer belonged to me. That storm was theirs. Daniel fell into step beside me. His calm eyes caught the city lights, his voice low but certain. "Justice doesn't always come in courts. It comes in truth." The words settled into me deeper than I expected. Truth had been my weapon, my shield, my freedom. And tonight, truth had spoken louder than all their lies. I breathed in the night air, crisp and alive. The weight on my chest, the one I had carried since childhood, was gone. In its place was lightness, almost shocking in its simplicity. Daniel glanced at me, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You look lighter already." I laughed, not bitter, not sharp, just free. "I feel lighter." The city stretched ahead, full of strangers and noise, but also full of possibility. For the first time, I wasn't walking away in exile. I was walking toward a life I chose. We didn't look back. Not once. There's a saying I once hated. Family is everything. For years, it felt like a curse. If family was everything, then what was I? Erased, unwanted, forgotten. But tonight I learned the truth. Family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who stands with you in truth. Blood had betrayed me, but truth had set me free. I thought of Michael, storming into the night, carrying debts and arrogance like chains he could no longer hide. I thought of my parents, sitting in that broken hall, pride shattered, reputation in ashes. And then I thought of Daniel, walking beside me, never asking me to be anything but myself. Sometimes pain is the forge, sometimes betrayal is the fire. And sometimes from those flames you step out not weaker, but unbreakable. I remembered the words my mother sneered years ago. You'll never be as good as your brother. She had meant them to crush me. Instead, they became the spark that built me. Tonight, I wasn't competing with Michael. I wasn't begging for love or validation. I wasn't invisible anymore, I was free. The audience watching this story might wonder if revenge truly brings peace. The truth? It wasn't revenge that freed me. It was reclaiming my voice. It was standing in front of the people who had erased me and saying, I exist. And I am enough. So if you've ever been told you're not enough, if you've ever been cast aside by those who should have protected you, remember this. Sometimes the family you're born into is not your home. Sometimes home is the truth you build for yourself and the people who honor it. I closed my eyes, letting the night air wrap around me like a promise. Tomorrow wasn't a burden waiting to crush me. It was an open road, wide and waiting. I had been erased once, but not anymore. This was my story now, my peace, my freedom, my rebirth, and that was the truest revenge of all.